Hi, my name is Caroline Lasersohn, and I'm making some videos that talk about some of the basic information a pilot needs to know in order to get his or her private pilot's license. In my previous videos, I've talked about controlling the aircraft, straight and level flight, and takeoff. Today I'm going to talk about arguably the most important part of flying, landing. Landing, in my opinion, is the hardest and most significant part of flying. There are a lot of steps to remember, and if you can't land, flying becomes obviously difficult and dangerous. It's also a critical phase of flight due to the decrease in airspeed and increase in the angle of attack, which makes stalling a real possibility. An interesting characteristic of landing is that the controls seem to switch functions. So instead of power adjusting airspeed and pitch controlling the altitude, the opposite occurs. During a landing, reducing the power makes the plane descend at a higher rate, and increasing the angle of attack makes the plane fly slower. Most landings require a specific approach to the runway. This changes depending on the airport, but the most general aspects of a normal landing are the base leg, the final approach, the round out, the touchdown, and the after landing roll. The base leg is when the plane is perpendicular to the approach side of the runway. During this phase, the pilot needs to accurately judge the altitude and distance needed for a gradual descent to the chosen landing point. The distance needed depends on the altitude of the base leg, effect of wind, and the amount of flaps. For example, when there is a strong wind or the flaps are used to produce a steep descent angle, the base leg must be positioned closer to the runway. After turning onto the base leg, power should be reduced and airspeed should be 1.4 VSO. VSO is the stalling speed with the power off and full flaps and depends on the aircraft. So if the VSO of your plane is 60 knots, speed on the base should be about 84 knots. The base leg isn't finished until a medium or shallow bank turn aligns the airplane with the central line of the runway. The turn is a descending turn with a slow speed, which increases the chance of a stall. Since this is one of the most critical phases of the landing and of flying in general, a safe altitude and non-steep turn are necessary aspects of this maneuver. The final approach starts when the plane is aligned with the centerline of the runway after turning out of the base leg. After aligning the airplane, final flap settings should be set and pitch altitude should be adjusted as required for the desired rate of descent. The speed during this phase should be around 1.3 VSO, or 78 knots if your plane's VSO is 60 knots. Trim is important to use to relieve control pressure, maintain a constant rate, and increase the angle of attack for a slower airspeed. Four distinct forces, lift, drag, thrust, and weight, affect the descent angle. If all the forces are constant, descent is constant, but this is rarely the case. The pilot controls the forces by adjusting airspeed, altitude, power, and drag through flaps. A change on any of these variables requires a coordinated change with another controllable variable. For example, if the pitch is adjusted to a high angle of attack, the plane would descend rapidly without an increase in power. A good final approach is characterized by descending at an angle and airspeed that would result in the airplane landing with a minimum amount of floating, aka a semi-stalled condition. To do this, power and pitch should be adjusted at the same time throughout the approach. Power sometimes is completely stopped, but landing with partial power gives the pilot more variables to control. So for example, if the approach is too high, all you have to do is reduce the power and lower the nose, and if the approach is too low, raise the power and raise the nose. Flaps are commonly used during landing and are helpful for a number of reasons. Flaps produce a greater lift and allows for a lower landing speed without the risk of stalling. They also produce a greater drag, which allows for a steep descent angle without airspeed increase. Drag also reduces the length of the landing roll after touchdown. The next stage of landing is the round out, otherwise known as flaring. This transition is between the normal approach attitude to the landing attitude. Flare starts about 10 to 20 feet above the ground after the final approach. The flare is a gradual increase of the angle of attack that subsequently reduces airspeed even more. This is made by applying back elevator pressure with the power on full idle and results in the stall horn going off. During the round out, the airspeed is being decreased to touchdown speed and lift is being controlled to result in a gentle touchdown. When the angle of attack is increased, lift is momentarily increased, which decreases the rate of descent, and the plane hovers over the runway. Airspeed is also decreasing though, which makes the plane's lift decrease again. At this point, more back pressure is needed to maintain the lift until the airspeed is slow enough for landing. The next step is the touchdown, which is the gentle settling of the airplane onto the landing surface. Well, gentle if done correctly. The airplane shouldn't touch down with a higher airspeed than necessary since that puts a lot of stress on the wheels. That's why flaring is so important. It lowers the descent rate. The back elevator pressure should be held until the front wheel begins to lower to the ground due to gravity. Sometimes additional throttle pressure during the flare can increase the descent time and make the landing softer. The after landing roll is simply when, after landing, the plane is moving down the runway until it reaches an appropriate taxiing speed. An important concept about visual flight rules landing is the stabilized approach concept. If the landing is stabilized, which means the airplane is descending at a constant rate in airspeed, the airplane will be heading in a straight line towards a specific spot on the ground ahead. The airplane doesn't actually touch down at this spot because of the float caused during flaring. The nose is also not pointed at this spot due to the high angle of attack, but the airplane is heading towards it anyways. This aiming point does not move in relation to the horizon, which allows the pilot to reference the spot in order to maintain a constant rate of descent. If stabilized, the image the pilot sees of the runway will be a trapezoid of proportionally larger dimensions the closer the plane is. The shape of the trapezoid does not change unless the approach angle is changing. If the approach is shallower, the runway will appear to shorten and become wider. If the approach is steeper, the runway will appear to lengthen and become narrower. Due to all the variables that change during flying, sometimes the aiming spot would result in either undershooting or overshooting the desired landing spot. If you're going to undershoot the touchdown spot, more pitch attitude and power will help. If you're going to overshoot the touchdown spot, decrease the pitch attitude and power. So that's the basics of a normal landing. There are all sorts of different types of landing based on different environments, like if the runway is short or there's a heavy crosswind, but all those maneuvers are just variables of a normal landing. Thanks for watching, and I hope I'll make some more videos soon. Bye!